What is up, guys? It's Doodoo Poker here, back for another video. In this video, we're going to talk about how to play the small blind versus the big blind who stabs flop, bets turn, and bets river. So we are on the river, and we have a 0 EV bluff catcher. Now, we have a hand history to accompany this. Also have some MDA, some GTO wizard, so let's get into it. In this hand, we are in the small blind with ace-9 of clubs. I decide to 3x my normal sizing, and my opponent decides to call. Now, my opponent is a regular. We only have about 240 hands, but we can tell from his stats that he's a reg. And we take a flop. Now, we flop an ace-high flush draw, so the first decision point is either to check or to bet. But if we look at a solver, we see on the flop, it's going to be mixed, preferring to bet slightly. But once we know how population plays on these board types, we do want to be more passively. What do I mean? I mean, let's look at some MDA, and we'll figure this out. But first, let's see what happens on the flop. So let's go back here, and we see our opponent bets 50. This is the first important data point to understand. He's betting 50% on the flop, so we want to make a mental note of his flop stab sizing. Now there's nothing really else to do except call, and we'll take a turn. On the turn, a 4 of diamonds comes. Let's look at MDA for not only the turn, but also turn filters. I'm going to look at the field as a single raise pot in position pre-flop caller. We know they stab around GTO percentages on the flop, but on the turn, they over barrel. This is true for all stab sizings from bet 30 to bet 50 to bet 70. So you need to make a mental note that when you call on the flop, you're going to get barreled on the turn more than a solver. Let's also look at filters. Remember, the board was a 7-2-2-4 board. Once we go to filters, we're going to notice something. This is the field as a single raise pot in position pre-flop caller. Big blind versus small blind, bet 50 on the flop, bet 70 on the turn. Reg MDA. What do you guys notice? You notice the aggregate is 33 weak. But if we go to filters, we see that a flop pair, remember the flop was 7-2-2, two-tone, is 38 weak. That means they're weaker than the aggregate when they barrel on the turn. Another good data point that makes us want to call more is the flop 9 high or less. We see that's also 38 weak over huge sample sizes. So we want to continue more than theory on the turn. So let's go to notes before we continue on in the hand. We want to know that when population stabs flop, if we call, they continue barreling on the turn more than theory. They barrel between 5 and 10% more than theory after stabbing the flop. The flop stab sizing is an important data point when deciding to bluff catch river. So let's go back to the hand, and we're going to figure some stuff out. So nothing else to do here except call. Now on the river, a queen of spades comes, so we miss our flush draw. Now there's nothing else to do except check to the imposition pre-flop caller, and my opponent, after betting 50 on the flop, betting 75% on the turn, decides to bet 150% on the river. Now, this is a big decision for us. Should we be calling or should we be folding? Let's go to GTO Wizard. In the GTO Wizard sim that I ran, when my opponent bets 150% pot on the river, we have terrible blockers. We should be folding in theory, but should we be folding in practice? It's an over 3 big blind mistake to call. Well, what we know about missed flush draws is that they over barrel on the river. We also know the overcard on the river is another good data point. So let's go back to the turn. We know on the turn that the paired flop and also the low flop 9 high or less are going to be overly weak relative to the aggregate, and the aggregate is overly weak relative to theory. So when we go to notes, we realize that the bet 50, bet 70, bet 150 sizing structure is interestingly implying hotkeys as well. This is another point I did not bring up. But two things to understand here. We know from MDA, did I show you MDA? Let me see MDA real quickly. When we look at MDA, this is a GTO line, bet 50, bet 75, bet 150. So MDA cannot help us, but we want to look at the sizing structure. The sizing structure of bet 50, bet 75, bet 150 implies hotkeys. That means it's more likely this person's a reg. Once we understand that, we know from the sizing we can't learn anything because it's a GTO sizing. But in MDA, the board texture supersedes the sizing. So we know we have multiple data points making us want to call. What are these data points? Well, there's multiple. The first data point is the paired flop. We know the paired flop is going to be over bluffed on the river. Also, the low flop, 9 high or less, is also weaker than the aggregate. The missed flush draw is a third good data point to bluff catch. And finally, the queen on the river, overcard on the river, is a fourth good data point. So we have 4 good data points that make us want to call. So even though it's a -3 big blind decision to call in theory, in practice, it's going to become a winning call. So we should be calling down here pretty quickly, and our opponent has 5-3 of clubs. When you go to a sim, a hand like 5-3 of clubs is never supposed to bet this river. Also, a hand like 6-5. 6-5 is never supposed to bet on a 7-2-2-4 queen runout. This will not happen. People are not checking back 5 high or 6 high, or a hand like 8-5 of clubs is never checking back. So what you want to do is you want to node lock all these hands to bet, and now instead of the solution being a -3 big blind call, it turns into, once you node lock all the hands like 6-5 and 5-3, it turns into a mixed call, but mostly calling. So once we understand how population plays in this spot, we know that just from sizing alone, you cannot figure out if this should be a call. We have to dig a little deeper. We have to realize that, one, the paired flop, especially on the 2x, because there's not much 2x in his range, and the missed flush draw, and the 9 high or low board, and the river overcard, 4 data points that make us want to call. We know in theory a hand like 5-3 of clubs, a hand like 6-5 off is never supposed to bluff, but they're not checking back 5 high and 6 high in reality. Once you node lock that into a solver, we realize it becomes a call. If you enjoy this type of content, please give me a like, please give me a subscribe. New video every single day, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I will see you guys in the next video. Take care.